Part 3. Characteristics of the different kingdoms. To achieve complete development of consciousness in the human form, the evolutionary process had to take 7 major leaps. From stone to metal, from metal to vegetable, from vegetable to worm, from worm to fish, from fish to bird, from bird to animal, and finally from animal to human being, each possessing different characteristics. Characteristics of the kingdom of stones and the kingdom of metals. Yo. Ahoy hoy. In the stone form and metal forms, the soul has its initial experiences of the material world. The kingdom of metals, like the kingdom of stones, is inorganic and solid. Both kingdoms include within their range a rich variety of species. In the solid states of stones and metals, life and energy are dormant. Therefore, they are regarded as inanimate. The stone forms and metal forms cannot move about themselves. They have no voluntary motion. For this reason, the consciousness which associates itself with these forms tend to assert itself through recumbent horizontal position rather than through vertical upright in the material world. What up, divinity? Characteristics of the vegetable kingdom. In the vegetable kingdom, consciousness realizes itself as half animate and half inanimate. The increased consciousness of the vegetable form asserts its existence in the gross world through an upright stand. The vegetable forms have to take the help of some other things, such as earth or rock, for maintaining an upright position. They can neither stand by themselves nor move voluntarily from place to place, since they are rooted in one spot. This is God Speaks. You can see that it's got the cross on there, along with all the other religions. This is the underlying truth of all of those things. So you might not dig this, but that's what I'm reading. And if you want, I'll read the first page again that kind of gives you a preface to this whole philosophy. But it's basically all is the one and the one is the all. And right now we're talking about how the evolution of consciousness and how we reincarnate through all these forms, starting from stone into vegetable, into worms, into all these other things, and then finally a human, and then your consciousness of evolution is complete at that point. So I will continue. Right now we're reading about part 3, characteristics of the different kingdoms. In characteristics of the kingdom of worms. In worm consciousness, the soul, so a worm also counts for like insects and stuff like that. In worm consciousness, the soul gathers experiences of voluntary movement. It experiences itself as animate. In its travail to gain more and further consciousness, the worm-conscious soul experiences itself in the material world, first as an invertebrate and later as a vertebrate, and goes on creeping in diverse species of worms. Voluntary movements are made by crawling by means of pairs of legs, sometimes by multiple pairs of legs, and sometimes pairs of legs and wings. Worms may have surfaces that are hairy, smooth, silky, rough, or scaly. The worm goes through a struggle for existence and survival and is endowed with sensation and life. Sometimes it is an amphibian. Has not only voluntary movement on earth, but also mobility in water. For the purpose of this explanation, the worm form includes all worms, insects, reptiles, and amphibia of their species. Even when they have legs and wings, they have a tendency to crawl, and they are distinct from birds and quadruped animals. The worm form is recumbent, has no upright stand, and is prone to lie prostrate. Characteristics of the kingdom of fish. The fish-conscious soul identifies itself with varied species of fish and experiences the gross world as a living creature in water. It and has fins. It goes through a struggle for sustenance and survival. The fish-conscious soul does not assert its existence in the material world through an upright stand, but experiences as recumbent, never holding its head high. Characteristics of kingdoms of birds. The bird form enriches consciousness with new experience, since as a feathered vertebrate, it is capable of flying in the air and with the help of two legs, maintaining an upright stand in the material world. Characteristics of the kingdom of animals. This isn't the most exciting chapter, I'll admit. The animal form brings to consciousness further expansion, since it can yield new experiences through the greater varieties existing in the kingdom of animals. Endowed with life, sensation, and power of voluntary locomotion, quadruped animals have to face a struggle for existence and survival. They are sometimes herbivorous and sometimes carnivorous. Animal consciousness does not assert its existence in the gross world through upright position, but has a tendency to look downwards with drooping head. Apes, however, are the most evolved type of animals, and they tend to stand upright like human beings. Characteristics of the kingdom of human beings. In the human form, the evolving consciousness of the soul attains its full development. The process of evolution of consciousness has its terminus in the human form. Here, consciousness is full and complete. When a human being is born, it can only lie prostrate, and it continues to experience this state for a fairly long period, but it soon expresses a tendency to first sit upright and then stand upright. The fully evolved human consciousness of the soul eventually asserts its existence in the material world through an upright position. And here is a Rumi poem added in here. The Ascending Soul. I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and rose to animal. I died as an animal and I was a man. Probably gonna get in trouble for this, huh? Why should I fear? When was I less by unaliving? Yet once more I shall unalive as man, to soar with angels blessed. But even from angelhood I must pass on. All except God doth perish. When I have sacrificed my angel soul, I shall become what no mind ever conceived. Oh, let me not exist, for non-existence proclaims in organ tones, to him we shall return. Rumi. Part 4. Reincarnation and the impressionless equipoise of consciousness. During the course of evolution of its consciousness, the soul, Atma, while consciously identifying itself with varied finite material forms, was also simultaneously, though unconsciously, identifying itself with its finite subtle form and its finite mental form, which associated with the soul in compact, homogeneous, unconscious alliance throughout the entire course of evolution of consciousness right from the first urge. Although the soul frequently and consciously dissociated itself from the finite gross forms which acted as media to experience the impressions gained in the course of evolving greater and higher consciousness, the soul could never dissociate itself, consciously or unconsciously, directly or indirectly, from its finite subtle form and its finite mental form. On the contrary, while the soul dissociated its identification with any one medium of finite gross form, it was the unconscious association of soul with its finite subtle form that fortified the soul with finite energy, to give a tendency to the consciousness of the soul towards identifying itself with the next medium of the next finite material form in order to experience the impressions of the last dissociated finite gross form, material form, retained and reflected by the finite mental form of this soul. It is but natural that, together with the evolution of higher and greater consciousness of soul, the evolution of the finite subtle form of soul also takes place to fortify the soul with greater finite energy, to incline the consciousness of the more and more gross material consciousness soul to identify itself with higher and higher types of finite gross forms evolved by the impressions of the last lower finite gross form. Gross just means material. Similarly, the evolution of the finite mental form of the soul also takes place simultaneously to accommodate, retain, and reflect the increasingly innumerable varied impressions gained and gathered by the evolution of greater and greater consciousness of the soul. Thus it is that, when the soul tends to identify itself with varied species of vegetable forms, the evolved finite subtle form and the evolved finite mental form of the soul begin to show greater and visible signs of the soul's association, which its much evolved finite subtle form and finite mental form in the shape of varied rapid cycles of changes taking place in vegetable forms, and also in the shape of vegetable forms showing first signs of peculiar, varied, and meaningful tendencies of self-preservation and survival of the fittest. In the worm, bird, and fish forms, this tendency of the finite mental form of the soul is translated gradually and steadily into the shape of instinct, until the animal form, this instinct is fully manifested as one of the finite aspects of finite mental form of the soul. Gradually, this instinct is further and completely transformed into intellect, this being the highest finite aspect of manifestation of the mental form in the human form of the gross conscious human soul experiencing the gross world. So it is that only in human form are the subtle body and the mental body fully developed, wherefore the soul, associating itself consciously with human form, is, so to speak, fully equipped with a human body, subtle body, and mental body, together with full consciousness of the gross or material world. Although the soul has gained consciousness in human form and thus experiences the gross world, yet the gross conscious human soul is unconscious of the subtle body and so cannot experience the subtle world. It is also unconscious of the mental body and thus cannot experience the mental world. Even though the soul has only gross consciousness and is unconscious of the subtle and mental, it does work through subtle and mental bodies, although indirectly on the gross plane. Even though the gross conscious human soul is unconscious of its subtle and mental bodies and their respective subtle and mental worlds, and therefore does not realize the energy of the subtle and the mind of the mental, yet it can use energy through various gross aspects of energy, such as nuclear energy, and it can use mind through various gross aspects of mind, such as desires, emotions, and thoughts. Of these, desires are the predominant aspect of the mind. So this soul, now fully gross conscious of the first most human gross form and still unconscious of the subtle and mental, experiences in the gross world the impressions of the last most animal form dissociated or dropped. When all the impressions of the lastmost animal form are exhausted, it is but natural that the first most human form is dissociated from the soul. The experience of the soul is universally termed the death of the human being. As explained previously, although the soul is dissociated from the first human gross form, it is never dissociated from its subtle or mental forms or bodies. It also previously, hi, thank you for the heart, me. How's it going? I'm reading some very dense spiritual material, so anyone who bears with me is wild. It was also previously explained that though the soul is dissociated from its first most human gross form, the soul retains, and of the dropped or dissociated first human form, the soul again associates itself with the next human form to experience the impressions of the previous human form dropped. In fact, the next most human form is nothing but the consolidated mold of the past impressions retained of the previous body or form that dissociated from the soul. Thus, the association of the soul with next human form is called universally the birth of a human being. Talking about reincarnation. Yeah, this is God Speaks. It's kind of gives it's like it claims to be an underlying truth of all religions and spiritual teachings, all linking it together. The apparent gap between the death and the birth of a human being is that period in which the gross conscious soul, gross just means material world, in its association with its fully developed subtle and mental bodies, has experiences of the predominant counterpart of the opposite impressions gathered by the most recently dissociated human form. This state of the soul in the apparent gap between death and birth is generally called hell or heaven, and this process of intermittent association and dissociation of consciousness of the conscious soul in human form, now fully conscious, is termed the reincarnation process. Ta-da! If the predominant counterpart of the impressions of opposites, as experienced by the soul now associated only with the subtle and mental, is a virtue of goodness, the positive aspect of opposite impressions, then the soul is said to be in heaven. If it is a vice or evil, then the soul is said to be in hell. The states of heaven and hell are nothing but states of intensive experiences of the consciousness of the soul, experiencing either of the predominant counterparts of the opposite impressions while the soul is dissociated from the human form. The soul itself does not go to heaven or hell, as is the general belief, because it is eternally infinite and eternally in the oversoul. It is the consciousness of the soul which experiences the impressions. Just to clarify what I read earlier, there's the gross consciousness that experiences the gross world, which is basically the material world. And then there's the subtle body that only experiences the subtle consciousness in the subtle world. And then there's the mental body that only experiences the mental world. And then there's the oversoul. So it's saying all souls are one. And when you experience the oversoul, you are one with everything or something. Anyway. I feel like I just read this paragraph. I forgot what paragraph I'm on. As soon as the predominant counterpart of impressions is experienced and exhausted, and just when equilibrium is about to be maintained between the opposites of impressions of the last human form that was dropped, at this juncture, the soul automatically associates with the next human form, molded of consolidated impressions of opposites, which were about to be in a state of equilibrium. Thus, I did read that part too. It is in the manner that an apparently unending chain of births and unlives of human forms or beings continues to form and dwindle. This is the course of reincarnation in human forms of the soul, after it has gained full gross consciousness through the whole series of evolution of the gross consciousness. Right from the unconscious state of the soul, comparable to the deep sleep state of man, until it has gained full gross consciousness comparable to the wide open eyes of a man in the awake state. While experiencing the gross world, the soul is one, indivisible, infinite, formless, and is eternally in the oversoul. Throughout the whole process of evolution, the evolution of consciousness it's referring to, reincarnation was an absolutely spontaneous outcome of the first urge manifested in the unconscious soul to become conscious of its eternal and infinite self. As has been mentioned already, we can now understand that the cycle of evolution of consciousness of soul evolved further in greater consciousness together with the evolution of forms of higher and higher types, while exhausting the impressions of the dissociated forms of lower types. So he's talking about reincarnating through rock forms to vegetables to animals to humans, etc. Or not, etc. That's the end. Thus, the evolution of consciousness of soul apparently causes the soul to identify itself with and gather varied innumerable impressions of higher and higher gross species of forms of the material world. The clean-cut and major concrete gross forms, after the first 7 major, most abstract gaseous and fluid forms, with which the consciousness of the soul associated, are separated by the 7 leaps from stone to metal, as I said, from metal to vegetable, from vegetable to worm, from worm to fish, from fish to bird, from bird to animal, and lastly from animal to human being. The most finite first impression of the first urge gave to the unconscious soul the most finite first consciousness. Gradually, varied impressions gained greater finite consciousness for the soul, and eventually the evolution of consciousness was complete when the soul identified itself with the first human form. Yes, there's a lot of clarification needed. It's all like stuff I already read, so. In human form, the soul... I can go back and read the first page if you ask. Yes, but in this... they use a lot of terms that are like just for the sake of explaining it. So like when they say worm form, they mean like all insects and everything's leptin. So it's not very scientific. It's more about just how the soul evolves. But yeah, they're not counting humans when they say animals. Even though, yeah, I think that's clear. Yeah. Do you want me to read the first page? Really quick, because it'll really... I'm going to read the first page really quick, just so you can get a context, since you seem interested. And then I'll get right back to where I was, because it'll clear stuff up. It's a banger. All right, part 1, states of consciousness. All souls, atmas, were, are, and will be in the oversoul, paramatma. Souls, atmas, are all one. All souls are infinite and eternal. They are formless. All souls are one. There is no difference in souls or in their being and existing as souls. There is a difference in the consciousness of souls, in the planes of consciousness of souls, and the experience of souls, and thus there is a difference in the state of souls. Most souls are conscious of the gross body material. Some souls are conscious of the subtle body, and few souls are conscious of the mental body, and very few souls are conscious of self. Most souls have experience of the gross sphere. Some have experience of the subtle sphere, few have experience of the mental sphere, and very few have experience of the oversoul. Most souls are on the gross plane, some are on the subtle, few are on the mental, even fewer are beyond the mental plane. And then it talks about the binding that souls have, which is impressions. But yeah, I think that's a good intro. Now I'll go back to where I was. No, I don't want to co-host with another creator. All right. Therefore, the soul, having now gained full and complete consciousness in human form, does not need any more or any other higher forms to evolve consciousness. The consciousness is full and complete. Though this soul has, which makes me think about aliens. Like, are they counting aliens in this? Or is like, it seems maybe they're all like a human form. Though this, if they exist, though this, yeah. Though this soul has gained full and complete consciousness, it is still not at all conscious of itself as one, indivisible, eternal, and infinite, and does not experience infinite knowledge, power, and bliss. But it is only fully conscious of its identity with human form and its varied aspects, and experiences the gross world in full. So that's a heavy line. It's saying that we are all one. We are all indivisible, eternal, and infinite. And we experience, and when we realize that, we experience infinite knowledge, power, and bliss. Pretty wild. The soul, with full consciousness, is still unconscious of its original infinite state because of the unwanted, though necessary, burden of the gross impressions of the human form, from which the consciousness of the soul dissociates as that form drops, unalives. These impressions of the human form, now unalived, still cling to the full consciousness gained, and, as usual, the consciousness of the soul centralizes itself in these gross impressions of the human form just dropped. I don't think I've seen that, but it sounds familiar. In trying to unburden consciousness of these impressions, the gross consciousness of the soul tends the soul to experience and exhaust these impressions through innumerable opposite experiences taken through a series of reincarnations. In this process of reincarnation, the consciousness of the soul, while trying to liberate itself from the burden of impressions, gets still further entangled at every stage of reincarnation. When a complete balance of experiences of opposite impressions is just about to be attained, it is just then disturbed by the consciousness of the soul associating itself with the next human form. Absence of this association would otherwise have neutralized the effect of the impressions by an equal balance of respective opposite experiences, and would thus have liberated the consciousness of the soul from all impressions of opposites. Wow. Gotcha. Yeah, I can't remember. I feel like I've seen that movie, but I definitely haven't read the books. Here, the simile of a perfect balance would be appropriate. The consciousness gained by the soul during the process of evolution resembles the indicator of the fulcrum of a perfect balance, and the two pans of the balance are filled with unequal weights of opposites of impressions such as virtue and vice, etc. In this way, consciousness, acting like the indicator at the fulcrum, tries to gain equilibrium, which is impossible as long as there in existence unequal impressions of opposites remaining to be experienced. It is therefore that the gross consciousness of the soul constantly seeks to experience the predominant opposite impressions in order to gain a total equilibrium of the impressions of opposites. That's very interesting to me. They're saying, I think what I'm interpreting from that is that when we reincarnate, we want to experience the opposite of what we just reincarnated from. So if you're rich, maybe you'd want to be poor or something like that. Interesting. But the tragedy is this, that as soon as the gross consciousness of the soul tends to reach the 0 point of equilibrium by gradually experiencing the predominant opposite impressions, it so happens that the consciousness of the soul invariably gets too engrossed in experiencing the predominant opposite impressions, and experiences them or exhausts them to such a degree that these predominant opposite impressions are now reduced to such a level that those impressions which were overbalanced by the original predominant opposite impressions now become predominant, and a great disturbance of balance or equipoise occurs, Wherefore consciousness, acting like the indicator at the fulcrum, swings or switches in just the opposite direction of its original experience. So yeah, right? It's got all the religions in it. This is the mastery and servitude symbol. Christianity, it's like the wheel of Buddha. There's like Hindu, everything on there. This claims, Meher Baba, the author, claims to be, he says that all religions are, and spiritual teaching and cults and practices are like beads on a string, and he is that string tying them all together, which I think is a little, I don't know, I have my own opinion on that, but that's what he claims to be. And it makes sense. The saying he's the string is funny, because like if everything's equal, then how is he the string? Anyway, it is at this juncture that the consciousness of the soul turns towards the experience of the newly predominant opposite impressions through another human form. A human being takes form or birth as a medium to satisfy the demanding need of the consciousness of the soul, which now seeks to exhaust or spend or experience the more predominant opposite impressions. It is but natural that the predominant qualities manifested now by the human soul will be in accordance with the predominant opposite impressions of which this new human form is but the mold. Yeah. Thus, in the process of reincarnation, the fully gross conscious human soul, fortified with fully developed subtle and mental bodies, though unconscious of these, must necessarily experience countless varied experiences of impressions of opposites, the impressions which are diametrically opposite in a chain of unending experiences. I saw these experiences on my ayahuasca journey. I saw all of them, and it made me laugh my head off that I was so concerned with this one little lifetime. I'll continue. Through its association with the gross body, the soul seeks to exhaust its previously accumulated opposite impressions, but rarely succeeds in doing so. On the contrary, it often accumulates fresh impressions of opposites. When the gross form is about to exhaust the impressions which brought it into existence, it is dropped. The residual opposite impressions lead the soul to heaven or hell in accordance with the predominance of virtue and vice. In discarnate existence also, all opposite impressions seek to be exhausted through the subjective experiencing of vivified impressions. But even here, in the state of heaven or hell, the equipoise of impressionless is generally approximated but missed, and the residual predominant opposite impression goad the consciousness of the soul to associate with a new gross medium. Complete equipoise is lacking in death as well as birth. It can only be achieved in the gross world. Therefore, an endless chain of lives in the gross sphere is sustained by residual impressions until the consciousness succeeds in getting established in impressionless equipoise. And they explained earlier about heaven and hell. It's kind of the spiritual idea of it, of just an experiencing of, I can't even explain it, but it's not talking about the Christian version of heaven and hell. It's like a state of being. At every stage and in every state of reincarnation, the consciousness of the fully human conscious soul gets firmly centralized in the more and more concentrated impressions of human forms with which it has identified and from which it has dissociated. There seems to be no escape from these concentrated impressions. These impressions must be experienced and exhausted, and the more impressions are experienced, the more the impressions become concentrated. The only solution to thin out this concentration of impressions is for the consciousness of the fully human conscious soul to experience increasingly and more rapidly these impressions in such a way and in so great a frequency that every impression experienced and the impression of that this experience created should be counterbalanced somehow by an opposite impression. Wow. I think it's interesting he uses the word frequency. The perspective more than imagining afterlife sentences. Yeah, it's just that's what he means. Yeah, and that's what I believe. All right. Throughout the process of reincarnation, this play of balancing and counterbalancing the opposites of impressions continues, and on this play is sustained the reincarnation process. On this play depends the eventual emancipation of the human conscious soul from the chains of ignorance and the ultimate realization of self-consciousness. Hi, we're reading about reincarnation from a book called God Speaks by Meher Baba. Therefore, while the gross conscious human soul, which is now fully conscious, undergoes the experience of opposites in the gross world, the consciousness of the soul has to identify, or reincarnate, itself as a number of times as a male, then as a female, and vice versa, in varied castes, creeds, nationalities, colors, and in different places, as rich one time, and then as a pauper. Ooh, I even said that earlier, I called it. Sometimes healthy, sometimes sick, and so forth, all the while reviewing opposite impressions, creating opposite impressions, and simultaneously exhausting them by opposite experiences. Hi, Debbie. Thank you for the heart-me. It is only through these diverse opposite impressions and their respective opposite experiences that the gross conscious human soul in the gross world could possibly one day, after millions of births and deaths, and through these opposite experiences of different of births and unalives, be able to balance or thin out the residual concentrated opposite impressions. This was very impression. Yes, exactly. Are you familiar, or did you just look that up? Because I rarely come across anyone that has heard of Meher Baba. It's something my parents were into, and I grew up in Myrtle Beach where they have a center. Yeah, cool. So there's a center in Myrtle Beach that I grew up on. It was very laid back. It was a spiritual retreat where people could go and just kind of hang out in the woods and read about this stuff, and there was no like schedule or anything. There was no event. Well, there was like events, but not like, it's not like you have to do anything. It's just a retreat. But it was cool. Good experience as a kid. A lot of hippies and stuff. I think he got popularized by like Woodstock era hippies. I was watching a documentary on Woodstock, and there was a picture of him, and his quote, he's attributed with the quote, "Don't worry, be happy." And there was a picture of him, and just like in the middle of Woodstock. So they were really into him. So, and then Pete Townshend from the Who was a very big Baba lover. They call them Baba lovers. It's very hands off. So. It is this cycle. I might have read this. It is the cycle of unalives and consequent births of human forms that ultimately results in inciting the fully evolved consciousness of the gross conscious human soul to involve this consciousness to that depth where the fully involved consciousness of the soul realizes the reality of the infinite eternal state of the self. You lived in the suburbs. Did they? Well, I didn't like live there. It was just like a retreat place I went to a lot. Here's a quote. The fact that I am weighed down from head to foot with desires has made a slave of me. I should be God in reality, were my heart and mind desireless. And that's a quote by Mir Taki, who I've never heard of. The process of involution of consciousness gradually takes place as the gross impressions of the opposites gradually become fainter and less concentrated. Very interesting. At this stage, the consciousness of the gross conscious human soul gradually gets dissociated from the gross world as the involution of consciousness infolds, and gradually dissociates from experiencing the impressions of the gross world. This involution of gross consciousness is only possible when the opposite impressions gradually, after a very, very long process, thin out through the process of unfailing reincarnation, which leads to the limit of gross impressions of the opposites and gross experiences of opposites. That's interesting to me. So one thing to clarify is when he says evolution, he's talking about the evolution of the consciousness, and which peaks at human form, and then you start the process of involution, which is returning to your identifying yourself as your true state of being infinite, formless, boundless, indestructible, and in a state of bliss. So kind of chill. Behind blue eyes. Oh, the Mirataki? Is that who you're talking about? That's interesting. That's very cool. The planes. All right, this is part 5, new chapter. The involution of liberating consciousness. Yeah, I'm like, who's... Oh, P. Townshend. Yeah, okay, that makes more sense. Totally. When the consciousness of the soul is ripe for disentanglement from the gross world, it enters the spiritual path and turns inwards. Oh, you know what? I should show you. Oh, hey, I turned right to it. Check this out. This is what I was just talking about. I don't know if I can really show it very easily. Let's see. It's stuck into the book. This shows the evolution of consciousness and then the involution of consciousness back to source. There's some really good pull-outs in this book. Cool artwork. Sorry, I can't really show it that well, but you can get the idea. It just kind of shows you how you go from start out as God, and then you go through all the forms of birds and insects and vegetables and animals until you reach human, and then you reincarnate a bunch, and then you experience the involution back to the source in a very pretty picture. Yeah. Let's see, it is hot in here. I'm gonna turn the fan on. Give me 1 second. Thank you, Sky. Yeah, probably. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm really bad at motivating myself to read, and I thought if I read it live, that would just encourage me to read it. So yeah, I'm gonna try to keep doing it as long as I feel like it, probably at night. Probably a little earlier. I just kind of slept all day, so I'm up now. Where are we? And thank you for being here. I much appreciate it. The process of involution is generally gradual. Man's heritage of form as well as impressions is from animals, so the gross impressions are very strong. In extremely rare cases, the gross impressions can suddenly disappear, and the freed consciousness of the soul experiences the oversoul. But it is more usual for the gross impressions to become fainter and fainter, thus getting converted into subtle and mental impressions, and then fade away completely. As a general rule, the soul, which has started on its homeward journey, does not come back to the gross world, in which it had lost itself as if in a wilderness. This does not mean that the subtle conscious soul does not take a gross form or dwell in the gross world with its gross body. It means that the consciousness of the soul is no longer entangled with the gross form or the gross world, and that it is chiefly engrossed in the subtle world. As a general rule, the soul first snaps its link with the gross world, then with the subtle world, and lastly with the mental world, and comes to realize itself as beyond all these. While it traverses this path, it crosses 6 planes, of which the first 3 belong in the subtle world. The 4th is on the borderline of the subtle and mental worlds, whereas the 5th and the 6th belong to the mental world. The soul, abiding everlastingly in the oversoul, is beyond all planes. Great, yeah. I'm glad you like it. Awesome. Yeah, I feel like I absorb it better when I read out loud, so I'm finding out. Because I tend to my thoughts start to go other places while I'm reading, and then I'm like, oh wait, what did I just read? All right. The oversoul. Yes, Paramatma is the word for the oversoul, and then the soul is called Atma. And earlier they explained that the Atma, the soul, is like they compared it to an endless ocean, and the soul is just a drop of water in that. So it's indistinguishable from any other drop of water, or indistinguishable from the entire ocean. And that's how they explain basically how we are all God, all is one. One is the all, and all is the one. Right, exactly. But this thing I just read kind of blew my mind. It means it's saying that, oh, it's confusing me because earlier it said that if you're in the subtle world, you don't experience the material gross world, and same for everyone. But now it's saying that we kind of are our consciousness is raised, we like stop reincarnating, and then we can still be in the gross world somehow. I don't understand that, but maybe we'll explain it. Yeah, it's a good one. First and second planes. As the gross consciousness of the gross conscious human soul gradually involves, the involving gross consciousness experiences partially the first plane of the subtle world through the medium of the fully developed subtle body of the soul. At this stage, the involved gross consciousness of the gross conscious human soul gets the first glimpses of the first plane of the subtle world, and experience these glimpses or impressions partially through the gross body and partially through the subtle body. Yeah, earlier they said they don't interact. Like if you're on this gross plane, yeah, I don't get that. Here, both the gross and subtle senses are used simultaneously. This is the stage when it is said that the human soul stands, as it were, on the line of demarcation, as shown in the sketch, which demarks the gross world from the subtle world. The consciousness of this human soul experiences strange things. With his gross eyes, he glimpses of the subtle plane. With his gross ears, he hears celestial music of the subtle plane, and with his gross nose he enjoys subtle scents. In short, the gross conscious human soul, partially on the first plane of the subtle world, experiences subtle impressions with gross senses. And gross, again, meaning material, physical, 3D. That is crazy because I can relate to that. Trippy. Gradually, with further, maybe I wonder if that's something to do with autism, or experiencing things from the subtle world. It's gradually, with further involution of gross consciousness, the gross conscious human soul experiences completely the first plane of the subtle world. Now the gross conscious human soul is no longer gross conscious, but he is subtle conscious. This subtle conscious human soul gradually becomes conscious of the second plane of the subtle world. This subtle world is the domain of infinite energy, the infinite power of God, which when translated into the finite, here manifests in the form of the infinite energy of the subtle world. Wow. When in human form the soul has subtle consciousness, it is unconscious of the body and mind, but it does work through the gross body and through the mind, but not directly, but on the subtle plane. Perhaps that's when you're tripping on psychedelics. That's what that experience is. My stroke of insight. I have not heard of that, but I'm interested. I'll have to screenshot that later. So even if the subtle conscious... I already have a book lined up after this one too. I'm going to read Joe Dispenza after this. Becoming Supernatural. It's a pretty popular book on here. It's kind of cutting edge. It talks about manifestation and things like that. The subtle conscious human soul on the second plane, with greater involution of consciousness, is gradually gaining consciousness of the infinite energy of the subtle world, and is capable of performing tricks or minor miracles of lower degree. For instance, with one wish, he can make a dry tree green, and vice versa. He can stop railway trains or motor cars, fill a dry well with fresh water, and so forth. Sounds like what Jesus was doing. This subtle conscious human soul on the second plane experiences the subtle world with the subtle senses of the subtle body. He is now totally unconscious of the gross world. Although from all outward appearances he functions as an ordinary man, eating, sleeping, and having feelings of pain and pleasure, etc., yet actually his involving consciousness experiences not the gross but the subtle world, and creates fresh, subtle impressions only of the sights, scents, and sounds of the subtle world. So, yeah, it does seem like a psychedelic thing. I wish I could flip back to earlier when they talked about what you experience in each world. Oh, thank you for the gift. I appreciate it. Because they talk about in the gross form you experience like physical reality, you eat, you poo, all that stuff. But in the subtle world, you only like see and hear or something like that. And then in the mental world, like you only see, I think. So something like that, just to give you some context on that. All right, now we're talking about the third plane. So further involution of the subtle consciousness of the subtle conscious human soul makes the soul experience the third plane of the subtle world. Here the subtle consciousness gains greater consciousness of the infinite energy of the subtle world, and the soul experiences greater finite power. Here he is capable of performing grand miracles, such as giving sight to the blind and restoring limbs to the maimed. Here, this subtle conscious human soul is also capable of experiencing the different planes and worlds of the subtle sphere, just as a gross conscious human soul is capable of traveling from Asia to Australia or America using the vehicles at his disposal. The second and third planes of the subtle sphere are the two major planes which are solely in the domain of the subtle sphere. The first plane is partially in the domain of the subtle sphere and partially in the gross sphere. Similarly, the fourth plane is partially of the subtle sphere and partially of the mental sphere. This fourth plane is known as the threshold of the mental sphere. And now we get to the fourth plane. With a gradual and further gain in the involution of the consciousness. So we've already reached peak evolution of consciousness as soon as we're human, and now we're involving, and apparently we can perform miracles from this. I've heard of people who can restore sight to the blind, but I also heard a bunch of, I wonder if, anyway, sorry, my mind just went down a whole rabbit hole. But I heard about, I'll just tell you, that I heard about somebody like performing these miracles, John of God, actually. And then, but now there was a big scandal about him, and I'm wondering if the powers that be made that up and kind of ruined his name that way, potentially, because as they do with anyone who is on the side of humanity. All right, anyway. The fourth plane. With a gradual and further gain in the involution of the consciousness of the subtle conscious human soul, the consciousness of the soul inclines the soul to experience the fourth plane. On the fourth plane, the soul is fully conscious of infinite energy. It is the very same infinite energy which is the shadowy aspect of that infinite power of God. Here, the soul is equipped with full power and is even capable of raising the DEAD and of creating new forms and worlds, breathing with life. On the fourth plane, there are no occult powers. They are only divine powers. Whoa. I had an experience in ayahuasca where I could create worlds, and that was some crazy stuff. As shown in the sketch facing page 55, the subtle conscious human soul on the fourth plane, possessing the key to the store of infinite power, is seen on the threshold of the mental world, confronted by the full blast of intense desires and emotions, which are the aspects of mind of the mental world. At this stage, the soul experiences, as it were, a state of the darkest night. He finds himself caught up between the devil and the deep. The overpowering incitement by intense desires to wield and use this infinite energy at will proves as a treacherous foe at this juncture, when the involution of consciousness of this subtle conscious human soul is unfailingly progressing rapidly towards gaining mastery over all desires. I have heard about this before in the community, where they say once you hit the fourth plane, apparently I thought it was the fifth, but if you use your powers for evil, you like go back to the start of the evolution of the soul, all the way back to like a worm or something. That's crazy. Let's see what's on page 55. It might be what I just showed a minute ago. Okay, here it is. I don't know how well you'll be able to see this. Unfortunately, yeah, sorry, you can't really see this. But it's saying, oh no, I lost my page. Oh, I got it. So we start, I mean, if I do this, there we go. Nope. Then it's backwards, isn't it? So you start here in the gross worlds, and then when your soul involves, you go up through the first, second, third plane, and then you hit the fourth one, and if you screw up, you go like back to the beginning or something like that. And then all the way up here you have It goes all the way up to the 7th plane where you are God realized. Cool. If these desires at their zenith overpower the soul on the 4th plane, and if the powers are misused, then the experience of liberating this infinite energy invariably proves fatal at this juncture for the soul on the 4th plane. The result is that all the consciousness gained by the soul is violently disintegrated, and the soul retains only the most finite consciousness and identifies itself once again with the stone form. Yeah, like I said, this soul then has to pass through the whole process of evolution from stone form onward to regain full consciousness. So yeah, don't mess up when you hit the 4th plane. And then I heard that once you pass that threshold, then there's no going back. You are good to go. Yeah, just be cool on the 4th plane. Just be cool, you guys. It'll be fine. The soul of the 4th plane has semi-subtle and semi-mental impressions. He is subject to most tantalizing temptations because it has intense and overpowering desires, good or bad. Being in possession of tremendous power, he is impelled to make good or bad use of it. If he misuses his power for the satisfaction of lust, or for the sake of craving for the name and fame, or for some other low purpose, there is a sudden fall of this consciousness of the soul, causing it to revert to the stone stage of consciousness. This sounds a lot like the people that are kind of behind the scenes. Nah, you didn't mess up. You are, yeah, no, I don't think we're here yet. I mean, unless you can, like, raise people from graveyards, then, we're not here yet. But, yeah, so we got a ways. But if like, these are the kind of things the kind of power that you'd be misusing, you know what I mean? But if, and it kind of makes me think of like the Illuminati or something. Like that's seems like what they're doing, and they probably know they screwed up, so they want to like stay alive as long as they can, so they don't reincarnate into a rock. That's just the impression I get. I don't know if that's true, but if by overcoming his temptations he makes good use of his tremendous, I don't know why it's using he and not like they, or I mean it's an older book, but he makes good use of his tremendous powers, or does not make any use of his powers, he goes onto the 5th plane. Oh, so you can just do nothing and you're cool. Where he is safe and has no possibility of downfall. But also, if he makes good use of the powers, he is sometimes pulled up into the 6th plane by the Vidyan conscious souls of Kutab state, or perfect masters, but not Jivanmuktas nor Majzubs. I have no idea what I just read. Good use of power in the gross world may be directed towards material and spiritual ends. For example, wealth might be spent for the material well-being of others. As for charitable hospitals, relief for the starving and the distressed, etc., or for their spiritual well-being by providing them with spiritual instruction and spiritual possibilities. But in the 4th plane, good use of powers invariably consists in harnessing them only for the spiritual well-being of others. These powers can never be used to bring about material prosperity for anyone. That definitely is a bad use. We might take the following as an example of good use of the powers of the 4th plane. Suppose a spiritual pilgrim is going through a desert and is on the point of unaliving due to the unquenchable thirst. The soul of the 4th plane can appear to him in the gross body and give him relief by giving him a jug of water and then disappear. Such use can be termed a good use. That's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah, don't worry. Be happy. That's another Meher Baba quote. Powers can be used for individual or collective good, but even good use binds and arrests the further progress of the soul. That is why the fourth plane... I have to do a puzzle. Thought my phone is getting a little low. I'm going to have to plug it in a minute. Where was I? Powers can be used for individual or collective good, but even good use binds and arrests the further progress of the soul. What? That's not what you just said. That is why the fourth plane is the most difficult to cross and is fraught with greatest dangers. The person who is stationed on the fourth plane finds it most difficult to abstain from wielding the tremendous powers at his command for the fulfillment of his overpowering desires. That sounds like some Buddhist stuff. Conquering your desire. So conquer your desire before you hit the fourth plane. The fourth plane is the threshold of the mental worlds. So we've gone from gross, physical, to subtle, now we're talking about the mental world after you reach past the fourth plane. Got all that? Yeah, it's confusing. On this plane, more than on any other subtle plane, the spiritual pilgrim is particularly susceptible to having a precipitous fall. The crisis which confronts the soul of the fourth plane is grave and hazardous because he comes into the possession of stupendous divine powers before having brought his mind into complete subjugation. He cannot control his mind completely because unless and until he rises into the fifth plane, which is of the mental world, he cannot directly experience or use his mind. Like the gross conscious human soul, the subtle conscious soul of the fourth plane also uses his mind indirectly. Now, on this fourth plane, the mind is fully alive. It is functioning in all its fully developed aspects of thoughts, feelings, and desires, which are the zenith of their overwhelming intensity. On the one hand, the soul is trying to gain mastery over its own insurgent mind and bring into subjugation the subversive forces of desires let loose. On the other hand, the limitless energy of the planes is completely at his disposal and is constantly seeking some expression or use. Yes. Something popped into my head while reading that. What was it? Don't know. All right. If the soul yields to the overpowering temptations to put his powers to wrong use, there is an enormous psychic crash of unimaginable magnitude. The explosive forces thereby releases bring about a complete disintegration of consciousness, subjecting it to a cataclysmic downfall from the heights of the subtle consciousness of the fourth plane to the very lowest depths of rudimentary stone consciousness, which the soul experiences in the very beginnings of evolution of consciousness. The psychic cataclysm of disintegration is comparable to the fusing of an electric bulb due to an irreparable short circuit. The fallen soul has now no alternative except that of again going through the long and laborious ascent of evolving consciousness through ages of evolution and reincarnation, through numberless forms, and then again gradually and patiently ascending through the planes. This disintegration of consciousness occurs only in the case of the fourth plane of consciousness, and that too rarely, only when the powers of the fourth plane are misused. It is a fact normally that when consciousness is once gained, it can never be lost, but the case of the fourth plane of consciousness is the one exception. If the soul does not misuse the powers at his command, but uses them for good without being overpowered by desires, then, with further involution of consciousness, the consciousness of the subtle conscious human soul sometimes experiences directly the sixth plane of the mental world and skips over the experience of the fifth plane of the mental world. It's like chutes and ladders up in here. But if this consciousness of soul on the fourth plane of consciousness neither uses nor misuses the powers of the fourth plane, then gradually, with further involution of consciousness, the subtle conscious human soul on the fourth plane crosses the threshold of the fourth plane and enters the mental world on the fifth plane. Cool. We're on to the fifth and sixth planes now. Thanks for hanging around with me, you guys. You guys must be very far in your evolution of consciousness to still be listening to this. With greater involution of consciousness of the subtle conscious human soul on the fourth plane, the consciousness of the subtle conscious human soul identifies itself with mind of the mental planes and experiences the mental world. The mind of the mental planes has two sections. In the first section, the state of mind is inquiring or reflecting. In this state, mind functions as thoughts. High thoughts, low thoughts, good thoughts, bad thoughts. One fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. Material thoughts, spiritual thoughts, and so forth. In the second section, the state of mind is impressive or sympathetic. In this state, mind functions as feelings of sufferings, emotions, feelings of desires, longings, feelings of pains, separations, and so forth. This confuses me because I'm still not understanding how, because at the very beginning of the book, they said that if you're in the gross plane, you don't experience any of the other planes. You're in the gross world and that's it. But if you're in the subtle world, you only experience that, and same for mental, and same for experiencing the self, which is Paramatma and the oversoul. But I'm curious on how we would be experiencing all of these emotions and feelings if we're not in a body, or are we in a body? I don't know. Just a thought. When mind of the mental world has distinct dual functions, it is necessary that the experiences in the field of mind, i.e. the mental world, must be distinctively of two kinds also. Thus, the mental world has two domains, the domain of the fifth plane of consciousness of thoughts and the domain of the sixth plane of consciousness of feelings. Very interesting. Are people just not aware of thoughts and feelings, do you think? Is that the difference? Is that the subtle and mental plane? Are we experiencing that from day to day? And then some people just aren't? Perhaps. Therefore, the consciousness of the mental conscious human soul on the fifth plane identifies with the first section of mind only and is conscious of that state of mind which is inquiring or reflecting mind. Thus, the mental conscious human soul, see it still says human, of the fifth plane is the creator and master of thoughts and is capable of controlling only the thoughts of all gross, subtle, conscious souls. Gross and subtle conscious souls. What? This is often misinterpreted as controlling the minds of all the gross and subtle conscious souls. He does not control the mind as a whole, but controls only that state of mind which function as thoughts only. I don't know what that means. I gotta plug my phone in really quick. Okay. quick water break. Quick, oversized magic card reveal. Otrimi, the ever playful. I've never heard that before. I'm not gonna repeat it because I think TikTok will get me in trouble. That's funny. Alright, where was I? The mental conscious human soul on the fifth plane of consciousness, while identifying himself as inquiring, thank you for the likes, identifying himself as inquiring or reflecting mind, emanates only thoughts, does not identify himself with the second state of mind, and is therefore incapable of establishing mastery over feelings, emotions, and desires. And Siri's trying to pick up what I'm saying.
Mastery involves awareness, understanding, and skillful management of your feelings,
Stop
emotions,
it.
and desires through practices like
my
mindfulness, emotional regulation techniques, and self-reflection.
Shut up. My Siri just activated from that somehow. Alright. Anyway. However, with greater involution of consciousness, the mental conscious human soul in the fifth plane gains consciousness of the second state of mind of the mental world in the sixth plane, and thus tends to identify himself as that mind in the second state, the impressive or sympathetic mind. Thus, the consciousness of the mental conscious human soul has involved sixth plane consciousness of the mental world. I wonder if this is like what people meditating in caves are doing. I know, that was so annoying. There's like no way to stop it, dude. There's like nothing I can click on. The mental conscious human soul of the sixth plane consciousness experiences the mental world through complete consciousness of feelings and thus has no thoughts at all, but actually feels that he is conscious of the feeling of seeing God face to face, continuously in everything and everywhere. He sees, in quotes, God continuously, but cannot see himself in God as God. Therefore, he cannot reconcile his feeling of sight of God with his own identity with God, and thus he longs for, feels for, has pangs for union with God, whom he sees face to face. This identification with the second state of mind, feeling, is the predominant aspect of divine love, which ultimately leads to the union with God. Dang. The fifth plane of the mental world is the state of full consciousness of thought. Hence, only mastery over the control and creation of thoughts is established, whereas no mastery nor control over feelings or emotions and desires is established. The sixth plane of the mental world is the state of full consciousness of feelings, and thus mastery over the control and creation of feelings is established, and no more scope is left for even a single thought to penetrate into the domain of feelings. The sixth plane consciousness is thoughtless and governs the feelings of the gross and subtle conscious souls. Thus is often misinterpreted as mastery over the hearts of all gross and subtle conscious souls. A soul with sixth plane consciousness does not govern or regulate the so-called heart, but controls and governs that state of mind in the mental plane which emanates feelings of emotions and desires. That was pretty dense and hard to understand. As I read this, I keep trying to assess where I would be at in all of these things, and sometimes it seems like I would just be the very lowest level of human, and then other times it's like, okay, I kind of relate to that, but then other times it's like, no, I'm not there yet at all. Like, obviously I'm not there yet, And I know I'm below the fourth plane, that's for sure. The loving of God and the loving for his union is really and fully demonstrated in the sixth plane. When even the sixth plane of the mental world is transcended, illusion vanishes and God is realized. Now we're getting all the way back to the peak, to the end of the journey. In the human form, when the soul is mental conscious, it is unconscious of the gross body and the subtle body, but it does work through the gross and subtle bodies, not directly, but on the mental plane. So even if the mental conscious human soul is unconscious of the gross body and the subtle body, and therefore does not realize the gross and subtle worlds, he can unconsciously utilize the gross through various aspects of the gross and is thus seen eating, drinking, sleeping, seeing, hearing, and feeling as an ordinary gross or material 3D conscious human being, though he is all the while conscious only of the mental world with his mental sense of seeing. Similarly, he can unconsciously utilize the subtle through various gross aspects of energy in the form of nuclear energies. I wonder if they're talking about plasma, while all the time being only conscious of seeing with his mental sense. The mental conscious human soul in the mental world has now only one sense, and that is of seeing. It seems like you are still in a body through this entire process of involution, which I don't know for sure, but that's what I'm inferring from this. That you're in a body the whole time, but like you're just so like tripped out and just you can only like see, so you don't like eat or anything because you're just so evolved. I guess, I don't know. So, this mental conscious human soul on the fifth plane experiences the first state of the mental world with the mental body or the mind and gains consciousness of the first state of mind. Here, this soul is capable of controlling the first state of mind, but is now totally incapable of performing any miracles because of his total unconsciousness of the infinite energy of the subtle world and its powers. However, as the mental conscious human soul controls the first state of mind of the subtle conscious human souls, the incitement in the subtle conscious human soul to perform miracles is checked, controlled, or aggravated according to the desire and will of the mind of the mental conscious human soul, who is capable of creating and controlling thoughts of other minds and is himself stable and can never again slide down to any lower level of consciousness. Now what I'm thinking about is good night. Thank you so much for hanging around. I really appreciate it. Who's leaving? Good night, Debbie. Good night, Kelly. Yeah, this is putting me to sleep too. I might have to wrap this up. Let's see. Oh, I can get through the end of this chapter. There's only a few more pages. Gradually, did I just read that part? Gradually, as the involution of the consciousness of the mental conscious human soul progresses deeper and deeper, he experiences mastery over the second state of mind, i.e., feeling, and he now becomes fully conscious of the mind or mental body and experiences the whole of the mental body on the sixth plane. This experience of seeing God face to face, seeing God everywhere and in everything. Right from the first plane through the sixth plane, the involution of consciousness progressed gradually and steadily as the consciousness of the soul had less and less frequent experiences of multifarious and diverse opposite impressions, which grew fainter and fainter. Therefore, While the involution of the soul's consciousness was in progress, the diverse opposite impressions became gradually scarcer and fainter until the involved consciousness of the soul on the sixth plane is fully conscious of the mental body and experiences the mental world in full, with practically no impressions at all except a faint last trace of residual impressions of opposites. That is, the involved consciousness fully identifies with mind, and the soul tends to realize that he is mind, and this soul, as mind, has a last and total impression that he sees God face to face in everything, but he cannot see himself in God. Oh yeah, what was I thinking? I forgot. I might remember it. This mental conscious human soul of the sixth plane, almost void of all impressions, and only conscious of the mind, now is confronted with God face to face and sees God in everything, but does not see himself in God because, being still conscious of mind, he takes himself as mind. This mental conscious human soul associates himself with mind and is conscious of himself as mind and experiences himself as still something other than God. This mental conscious human soul on the sixth plane actually sees God face to face more vividly and intensively than the gross or subtle conscious human soul sees objects of the gross or subtle world. Wow. At this stage, the consciousness of the soul, which had experienced diverse, innumerable, and opposite impressions, now experiences the last trace of dual impressions of the opposites. This mental conscious human soul on the sixth plane is still conscious of duality, identifying himself as mind and differentiating himself from God. And now we are on to the seventh plane, which is the last one and the end of the journey of the soul. This experience of duality lingers on and on until the final involution of consciousness of the mental, conscious human soul leads the soul to dissociate itself from the mind. The consciousness of the mind had objectified God, and makes the soul associate itself with its own self, the soul, or Atma. Thus, the consciousness of the soul is now said to experience at last the consciousness of the seventh plane. Here, on the seventh plane, the self-conscious human soul is conscious of himself as God and experiences infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss. For the mental conscious human soul to cross the sixth plane and experience the seventh plane by his own efforts is quite impossible. At this stage, the grace of a perfect master is absolutely essential to help the mental conscious human soul to dissociate himself from the consciousness of mind and to make him realize his unity with the infinite state, to experience infinite bliss consciously, and to realize that he, Atma, was eternally in bliss. Very interesting. There are stories about Meher Baba of how he attained God realization in human form by seeing 5 perfect masters, and one of them threw a stone and hit him in the forehead and it like awoke him. And then there's other stories for the other 4. So it is that the self-conscious human soul of the seventh plane is now fully conscious of the self as infinite and eternal, and is now also conscious of the source of energy and mind, which were nothing but the shadowy aspects of his own infinite power and infinite knowledge. And something it said earlier was, when you're that only the self-conscious soul that's reached the seventh plane sees reality. Everything else is just a shadow of that. So everything we experience is nothing more than a shadow of reality, a dream. I'm gonna read that. I'm gonna start that paragraph again. This self-conscious human soul, which is now self-realized or God-realized, not only experiences infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, but simultaneously radiates them. Sometimes in certain cases, such as self-conscious human souls also make use of this infinite power, knowledge, and bliss directly and consciously for the emancipation of other souls from their impressions and their respective associations with the gross, subtle, and mental forms and worlds. So imagine these perfect masters are Jesus, Buddha, Allah, a whole lot more. Buddha, did I say that? Ahura Mazda, Allahi. There's like just every god and religion. In its travail to gain self-consciousness, the individual eternal Atma, soul, unconscious of its infinite state in Paramatma, gathered and experienced innumerable diverse impressions, and all the while associated itself with the finite and ephemeral existences unfurling the gross, subtle, and mental worlds, while evolving gross consciousness of the gross world and while involving consciousness of the subtle and mental planes of the subtle and mental worlds. Involution of consciousness of the Atma, soul, culminated by the grace of a perfect master, led the Atma to self-realization of its infinite state in Paramatma. Thus it is that when the consciousness of the Atma gained self-consciousness and experienced infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, the Atma realized that it exists eternally, that all through the travail to gain self-consciousness, the impressions, experiences, and associations of the gross, subtle, and mental bodies and worlds were nothing but a vacant dream, and that the identification with gross bodies, creatures, and human beings, and all the experiences of the three worlds and the six planes, with all of their paraphernalia, had their relative existence sustained and maintained as long as the consciousness of the Atma was immature. Maturity was only gained in the seventh plane with consciousness fully involved. This led the Atma to realize the self, or made the Atma fully conscious of God realization. In other words, the Atma's own infinite state of Paramatma was consciously realized. It is only after the final annihilation of the mind and the wearing out of the curtain of mental impressions that consciousness can function in full freedom from all impressional bindings. This means crossing the deep abyss which separates the sixth plane from the seventh plane. The seventh plane is the formless abode of the highest of the high, the Most High, or the infinite God as truth, can be realized only by transcending the entire realm of imagination. Only on this seventh plane does the soul fulfill the initial urge for self-knowledge by experiencing its own self as identical with the unchanging, eternal, indivisible, and formless Oversoul, with infinite knowledge, infinite reality, truth, infinite power, and infinite bliss. Wow, that was quite a paragraph. And that is the end of that chapter. And there is a quote by Asghar, probably. 100 times I felt that I held your garment firmly in my hands. When I opened my eyes, I was amazed to discover it was my own garment that I was holding. And there's a cliff note here that I'll read. The God-realized man is the Almighty, plus knowledge and consciousness. He is in the perfect wakeful state. He is knowledge, knower, and the known. He is love, lover, and the beloved. And just sub in he for they or whatever. I don't think it has a gender. He knows that he is in every Jiv Atma and that everyone is in him. The God-realized man knows that he is the be-all and the end-all of existence, and that he always was and will remain the same one, infinite ocean of truth. But the ordinary man does not know whence he came and whither he will go. Wow. Powerful ending to that chapter. It's like all repetitive, and then it's like bam, hits you with like some deep stuff. And I've made it to this chart again that shows all the 7 planes. That was pretty heavy, huh? This book is dense. I like that. It's raw. So yeah, thank you so much for hanging around with me. And I'll try to read it tomorrow. It'll probably be earlier. But I can send you, if you want to friend me, I could try to send you a message like, hey, I'm going to start in a little bit or whatever. Oh, perfect. Yeah, it sounds like you are on the path for you to have ears for this type of thing. So, heck yeah. All right. Well, I'll be off and I'll see you around. Thank you so much. Good night.